Hi! This is my bonus soundtrack review video for the Atelier Firis DX trilogy, a series of JRPGs developed by Gust and published by Koei Tecmo. A huge thank you to Koei Tecmo Europe for giving me review codes for these games. I really appreciate it. So with this video, let's dive right in. What makes the music and sound design of the Atelier Firis DX trilogy stand out compared to both other Gust games and other games in general? Gust is known for its incredible soundtracks, and the Atelier series is no exception. Each trilogy always delivers, with a pleasing and distinct sonic aesthetic. Firis DX on the whole ventures more into folksy and pop territory, utilising a mix of real, organic sounding instruments and the occasional electronic or MIDI synths. It stays very upbeat, and even the melancholy piano tracks for sad moments aren't that dark or depressing. I think for Firis, the composers wanted to stay true to Atelier and embrace a childlike sense of wonder and joy, particularly for the second and third games. And remember, these games were originally developed before Riser came along. There were definitely adventurous elements, but they were still quite far from traditional intense RPG territory. To start with, I'll talk about my standout points for the first game, Atelier Sophie DX. For the most part, Sophie has a simple, cutesy soundtrack, which harkens back a little bit to Atelier Rorona. The soundtrack, like the gameplay, has many parallels to Rorona in both a good and bad way. It doesn't have any delusions of grandeur whatsoever, and is so cute, simple and upbeat that you can't help but love it. Sophie's workshop theme emulates the farmyard folksy style found in earlier Atelier games, such as Marie, Ellie and Rorona. This was a sweet callback after the somewhat experimental styles of workshop themes found in the Dusk trilogy. I mentioned in my main video that Sophie feels a little bit like Atelier back to basics, and I do think the soundtrack reflects this in some ways. However, this being said, there are some absolutely kick-ass battle and boss battle tracks, which really stand out. Daisuke Achiwa, a long-standing Gust composer, is absolutely on top form here. For example, tracks such as Juno and Saturnus give an incredibly large sense of scale, which contrasts with the more non-threatening tracks. Even Achiwa's more casual tracks, such as Spring Breeze Polska, are very memorable and cute. Standard battle themes are great too. Spring Wind Skylark, the standard battle theme, is one of the most joyful, upbeat and cute battle themes I've heard, which reaches a great balance between hype and wholesome. This was one of the first times I'd heard Hayato Asano's heavenly work, and he only continued to improve from this point. In my mind, he's best known for his work on Blue Reflection, but he's also done some incredible battle themes for Atelier Riser 1 and 2. In terms of instrumentation, Sophie's soundtrack utilizes soft woodwinds, muted guitar strumming, and a lot of accordion. As well as strings and other instruments. Occasionally, real instruments are mixed in for the vocal tracks and more prominent boss battles. A random highlight, Harold the Clockmaker's theme, Counterclockwise, is interesting from a sound design perspective, as it really does make good use of ticking clocks. And builds on them with a European-sounding accordion melody and bass line. The European influence in some of the soundtrack does match with the architecture and setting of the game. Overall, Sophie's soundtrack just fills me with joy and happiness, and you can easily find tunes to tap your toes and bob your head to. Let's move on to the second game, Atelier Firis DX. Firis has a drastically increased number of tracks compared to Sophie. Every small town and big city alike that you visit has its own unique background music, and significantly different versions for day and night. Almost every track sounds lush and organic, and really reminds me of Atelier Aisha in terms of instrumentation and atmosphere. Both games are linked thematically to organic elements, Aisha with its seasonal flowers, and Firis with its adventurous journey and the player trekking through fields, forests and mountains. The more natural sounding tracks from both games mesh with these themes perfectly. Of course, it goes without saying that the music matches the scenery and builds an incredible atmosphere. It fills the locations with life, where sometimes the graphics can't quite manage to do so. This isn't a first for Gust games. Their beautiful sonic landscapes do a lot of the heavy lifting due to their limited budget. Honestly, their efforts give us an amazing soundtrack to listen to outside of the game, so I'm not complaining. Firis' battle themes build on the style of Atelier Sophie, but sound more intense and fast-paced. Kazuki Yanagawa really excels here, with some beautiful sounding woodwinds, strings and layered intricate melodies. Even the standard battle themes are really hype. Some standout boss battle themes for me were Rabbit and Crow, which plays for a pretty major boss battle. As well as Poreroka, featured in a certain underwater boss battle. It's not just the exploration themes and battle themes that shine though. Even the light-hearted, whimsical background tracks for dialogue and event scenes are noticeably catchy. There's often a line of bouncy percussion and soft woodwind, which gives such an airy, youthful feel to the scenes. I think it matches Firis and her outlook on life perfectly. Even though some of the tracks might be synthesized and MIDI-based, the composers all find extremely creative ways of breathing life into them. Reverb, stereo panning, and detuning to make the instruments sound more real. As a result, it just sounds a lot richer and more layered than a lot of other game soundtracks I hear. Atelier Firis' 2 workshop themes are some of my all-time favourites from any Atelier game. In the extras section of the game, the composer actually notes that he wanted to structure the workshop theme with several different sections and counter melodies, ebbs and flows to match Firis' ever-changing journey. I think he managed this perfectly. Also, the title screen and workshop theme both change once Firis reaches a certain important milestone on her journey. The title screen turns from melancholy and brooding to joyful and upbeat with layered vocals added in. This worked so beautifully in the context of the gameplay, because it gives the game and the player a rejuvenated sense of energy at this point. Basically, you're finally free to explore and be independent. Firis achieved her goal and is so joyful, and the world opens up to her. The second version almost made me tear up slightly. It just sounded so happy. Finally, let's jump to the last game in the DX trilogy, Atelier Lydie and Suelle DX. This soundtrack does have a very interesting and unique element, thanks to the dual twin protagonists. Rather than different versions of tracks for day and night, we have slightly differing versions for Lydie and Suelle themselves. You can switch characters, and the music switches along with them, which is nice. I do remember Lydie and Suelle each had their own themes, which were based on the contrasting melodies in the intro theme. I have to admit this was very clever. When you listen to the OP, it sounds like two almost clashing but intertwined melodies that each girl is singing. This is reflected in the battle themes as the melodies separate and become their own track. The OP acts as a recurring ongoing motif throughout several other tracks in the soundtrack. It's just a shame that the actual tracks themselves weren't as engaging to me as the concept. Everything was just a bit too kiddie, sweet and saccharine. This was clearly a deliberate choice, and one that some fans will definitely like, I'm sure. I think for me, it links to the fact that I wasn't loving Lydie and Suelle as protagonists in the first place. For the instrumental tracks, I didn't mind it as much. Anyway, maybe some people loved Lydie and Suelle's opening theme, so it's subjective. There's a heavy reliance on music box sounds, and slightly artificial sounding MIDI woodwinds. Nothing ever sounds bad, but coming from Firis, everything sounds a lot less organic. It's interesting because I had a really similar feeling with Atelier Sophie, the last game in the Dusk trilogy. Maybe Gust typically uses up all their soundtrack budget for the second game in a trilogy? I have no idea. Or maybe this was just the direction they decided to go in? At least for Lydie and Suelle, it does match thematically with the young age of the main characters. In my opinion, Lydie and Suelle's soundtrack is at its best when it's ethereal and fantastical, especially the exploration themes found in the painting worlds. Some of these are truly beautiful and dreamlike. The atmosphere created by the music is undoubtedly amazing in all three of the DX games. You might have noticed I didn't mention or dwell on the opening themes of the games too much. Honestly, I only really loved Sophie's opening theme. the OPs weren't as much of a highlight for me compared to the Arland or Dusk trilogy, or even Riser 1 and 2. With the Lydie and Suelle opening theme, I like what they were going for with the two contrasting melodies, but it wasn't sonically appealing for me. These were the only ever so slightly weak points in the music for me personally, and they're hardly negative at all when the rest of the soundtrack is so engaging in each game. A quick point to end with, I know this isn't part of the soundtrack per se, but since we're talking about the sound, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the issue of voice acting. Unfortunately, after the first two games, which had partial English voice acting, the last game, Lydie and Suelle, cuts out an English dub option entirely. I'm aware that most people play with Japanese voices anyway, but for those who don't, it was a huge shame that the option was removed midway through a trilogy of games. I wish Koei Tecmo and Gust would reconsider this given the huge success of Riser 1 and 2, as it would really open the series up to a much bigger audience. That's all. In conclusion, the Mysterious DX trilogy is on par with many of Gust's other amazing works. As I said, Sophie's soundtrack feels joyful, lively and wholesome. Firis' soundtrack is truly adventurous and varied, with instrumentation that sounds lush, layered and organic, to match the natural landscapes that you'll be traversing in-game. Lydie and Suelle aims to fully embrace your inner child, and it does so with both the characters and the youthfully upbeat music scoring. It perfectly matches the vivid, vibrant art style that the game has. I loved all three soundtracks for the Mysterious DX trilogy, but Firis' seemed particularly inspired to me. The adventurous, uplifting exploration and battle themes, the intense boss battle themes, and even the light-hearted, relaxing event themes, all breathed life into this game for me. Of course, if we compare to some of Gust's newer work, Atelier Riser 1 and 2 obviously have incredible elevated soundtracks, but this trilogy featured a lot more pieces from the original Gust composers. It feels more familiar, more comforting, and just more Atelier. I highly recommend you pick up this trilogy, the Dusk trilogy, or if nothing else, just listen to some of these gorgeous soundtracks. Oh, and please check out my other videos if you have time, as I've made quite a few about other Gust games and Atelier. Thanks very much for listening and watching.